Hi, I'm Mr. Cellini, and today we're going to take a look at another CRQ section from the Global History Regents. This time it's from the August 2023 exam. Document 1 of the CRQ section refers to the topic of imperialism. Imperialism is basically the idea that one country takes some kind of control over another part of the world, usually for some sort of economic gain. I'd argue that imperialism has been going on since the dawn of human civilizations, but in 10th grade global history, we're mostly concerned with imperialism practiced in the 1800s and early 1900s by European nations in parts of Africa and Asia. The motivating factors for imperialism during this time mostly involve European countries trying to obtain natural resources to use in their factories. In addition, those same European countries were seeking new markets for their manufactured goods. In simple terms, this means that they wanted more potential customers for the products that they are now mass producing in their factories. Yes, the Industrial Revolution is a historical circumstance for the era of imperialism during this time. Let's see if Document 1 reflects any of these ideas. Okay, so Document 1 has this picture of an elephant, and it's titled Ivory and Apes and Peacocks, East Africa, the land from which, men say, ages ago, King Solomon's ships came sailing with their freight of rare and precious things, gold and ivory, apes and peacocks. Today, it is British, and all of the tropical domains of the empire, none is richest in promise than this vast territory 20 times the size of England. But today, its wealth is of another kind, coffee from the uplands of Uganda, Tanganyika, and above all, Kenya, tobacco from Rhodesia and Nyasaland, which also sends us tea, cotton from Uganda, sisal from Tanganyika and Kenya, cloves from Zanzibar. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these names. You have a personal interest in the future of East Africa, for as her industries prosper, her orders for British goods grow larger year by year, and that means more employment and better times for all of us. Drink Empire coffee, smoke Empire tobacco, use Empire binder twine. You'll be helping in one of the greatest colonizing ventures to which the British race has ever set its hand. So now that we've read the document, let's see what question 1 wants us to do. The question is asking us to explain the geographic context for the history shown in the document. In simple terms, this means that we should explain how the geography led to the history. Geography can include landforms, bodies of water, natural resources, and even climate patterns. In your answer, you can restate some of the question if you like, but I'm just going to get right into it here. I'll say that Africa had natural resources valuable to the British due to the fact that East Africa had fertile soil and a favorable climate for agriculture. Before we move on to the next document, if you could do me a favor and please hit that like button, I'd really appreciate it. This helps me grow the channel and get my content out to more people. All right, let's move on to document number 2. This one also describes some of the effects of European imperialism, such as transplanting European crops to new places. Let's take a look at it together. Again, I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. Wangari Maathai was an activist, environmentalist, and politician from Kenya. She won the Nobel Prize in 2004 for establishing the Green Belt movement. This organization planted over 1 million native trees between 1977 and the present. At about this time, something profound started happening in the hitherto pristine, formerly untouched, Aberdare forest. The colonial government had decided to encroach into the forest and establish commercial plantations of non-native trees. I remember seeing huge bonfires as the natural forests went up in smoke. By the mid-1940s, the British had introduced many exotic tree species into Kenya. Pines were transplanted from the northern hemisphere, and eucalyptus and black wattle from the southern hemisphere. These trees grew fast and strong and contributed to the development of the newly emerging timber and building industry. To popularize them, foresters gave many such seedlings to farmers free of charge. Farmers appreciated their commercial value and planted them enthusiastically at the expense of local species. However, these trees did damage too. They eliminated local plants and animals, destroying the natural ecosystem that helped gather and retain rainwater. When rain fell, much of the water ran downstream. Over the subsequent decades, underground water levels decreased markedly, and eventually rivers and streams either dried up or were greatly reduced. So basically the general gist is that the British planting their own crops kind of messed up the African environment. So let's take a look at the question for document 2. This one is asking for us to explain the author's point of view on the introduction of non-native trees to Kenya. The author's point of view refers to the author's position on a particular issue. This should be more specific than the author thinks that the situation is good or bad. To properly explain the point of view, we should state what we believe to be the author's position, and then support our claim with evidence from the document. Let's write a response for the question together. I'm going to write that Matai's point of view was that non-native trees did damage to Kenya's natural ecosystem. For example, she states that European crops led to streams and rivers drying up or were greatly reduced in size. Finally, the third question in a CRQ set always requires you to use both documents together in some way. This question is asking us to identify and explain a cause and effect relationship between the documents. I think an easier way to think of this is to explain how or why the history found in the first document led to the history found in the second document. This can be done in 2 to 3 sentences, so don't waste your time filling up a whole page with writing. There are only 5 lines on the paper for a reason. Let's start writing a response to the question. In my first sentence, I will state the main idea from document 1 and that it led to the main idea from document 2. So here's how my first sentence will look. The British desire for resources led to environmental damage in Africa, right? Those are the main ideas from each of the documents. This takes care of the requirement that we use evidence from both sources in our answer. Now I have to explain the connection. This might require that you use some outside knowledge of world history in your answer, but I can rely a lot on the documents in this case. Here is my explanation. This is because the British encouraged the planting of non-native plants that would benefit British industries. However, this caused the destruction of native and essential plants that helped gather and retain rainwater. So that takes care of the first CRQ set, but remember, the Regents always has 2, so let's start taking a look at the second one. Document 1 refers to some of the historical circumstances that led to the Russian Revolution, which is sometimes referred to as the Bolshevik Revolution. This was an event that took place in 1917 and involved replacing the rule of the Tsar with a totalitarian government based on communist principles. Let's take a look at the document together. Despite the turmoil, the authorities could have contained the situation if they had avoided open conflict with the crowds. But the forces of the Tsar opened fire, killing protesters. The demonstrations began to turn into a full-scale revolution as angry protesters broke into the barracks of the city's Pavlovsky Regiment. Rather than attack them, the soldiers joined the protesters, some even firing on their own officers. Nothing less than Tsar Nicholas's abdication, meanwhile, could save the war campaign against Germany. All his senior generals told him so. The Duma also called on him to stand down. On March 2nd, 1917, Nicholas II gave up the throne. The end of the monarchy was marked by scenes of rejoicing throughout the Russian Empire. Symbols of monarchical power, emblems, coats of arms, double-headed eagles, and Tsarist statues were destroyed. So the question for this document is asking us to explain the historical circumstances that led to the history found in the document. This requires us to make a connection between a prior historical event and the history we just read. Don't just summarize the main idea of the document as your answer. That's not good enough. So let's write down a response together. I'll say that the historical circumstances were that the Tsar became increasingly unpopular for Russia's failures in the Russo-Japanese War and in World War I. In addition, Russia's factories had very poor working conditions since it was only just beginning the process of industrialization. Okay, so those are examples of prior events that happened before the document, so we should finish by making some kind of a connection to what we actually see in the document. Let me continue. These developments led to mass protests seen in the document that called for the Tsar to abdicate the throne. Let's move on to document 2, which is still about Russia, but it's from 1931, and now Russia is part of the larger Soviet Union, or USSR, and it's being led by the dictator Joseph Stalin. This is a person who often used both censorship and propaganda to control the minds of the Soviet people. Let's read the document together. On June 23, 1931, Joseph Stalin delivered a speech, New Conditions, New Tasks in Economic Construction, at a conference of business executives. It was attended by representatives of the economic organizations united under the Supreme Council of the National Economy of the Soviet Union and by the People's Commissariat of Supply of the USSR. The speech was published in the Soviet newspaper Pravda on July 5, 1931. As you see, we now have an entirely new situation and new conditions in regard to the supply of manpower for our factories. What follows from that? It follows, firstly, that we must no longer count on an automatic influx of manpower. This means that we must pass from the policy of letting things proceed automatically to the policy of organized recruiting of workers for industry. But there is only one way of achieving this, that of contracts of economic organizations with collective farms and collective farmers. As you know, certain economic organizations and collective farms have already adopted this method, and experience has shown that this practice yields important advantages for both the collective farms and for the industrial enterprises. So Stalin is basically pushing for recruitment of workers for industries, but also for collective farms, right? Collective farms meaning giant government-owned farms that peasants kind of worked on collectively for the benefit of the state. Perhaps you need a lot of people to work on those farms so that enough food is produced to support the people working in all the factories. Let's continue the speech. It follows, secondly, that we must pass immediately to mechanization of the heavier processes of labor and develop this to the utmost. So timber industry, building industry, coal mining, loading and unloading, transport, iron and steel industry, etc. This, of course, does not mean that we must abandon manual labor. On the contrary, manual labor will continue to play a very important part in production for a very long time to come. But it does mean that mechanization of labor processes is for us the new and decisive force, without which neither our tempo nor the new scale of production can be maintained. So here we have yet another point of view question. This time we need to identify Stalin's point of view regarding the Soviet economy. As always, we should clearly state what we believe to be the author's position and support our claim with some evidence found in the document. I'll write that Stalin's point of view was that the Soviet economy needs to industrialize. For example, he believed that the Soviet Union must prioritize the production of timber, coal, and steel, as well as make improvements in transporting goods. The last CRQ question on this Regents is again asking us to use both documents about Russia that we just read. This time, we need to identify a turning point associated with the documents and use the documents to explain how there was a major change in the world as a result of the turning point. This can be tricky because you will have to think of a major historical turning point on your own. Ask yourself, what major historical event happened in between the two documents or around the same time as both documents? In this case, I think our best bet is to identify the Russian Revolution as our turning point, since it happened after the rule of the Tsar and before the rule of Stalin, and it definitely explains how and why the communists, such as Stalin, were able to come to power and change Russian society. Let's write down an answer together. Let's start with identifying a specific turning point. I'll write that a turning point associated with the documents is the Russian Revolution. Now I will use the documents to show how things changed in Russia as a result of that turning point. Prior to the Russian Revolution, Russia suffered defeats in war due to a lack of a strong and modern military. After the Russian Revolution, the communists rose to power, and leaders like Stalin prioritized the buildup of industry and turned the Soviet Union into a world superpower. This contributed to the Soviet Union being able to help defeat Germany in World War II and develop an atomic bomb soon after the war. So I went a little further there. I used information from both documents to show how things changed in Russia, but I threw in some outside information as well to assist with my explanation. This isn't required, but if you could do it, why not add it just to be safe? So that does it for the CRQ section on this test, and I hope this video helped you prepare. Be sure to check out these links to playlists for my other Regents review content. I have done many videos going over past multiple choice sections, CRQ sections, and enduring issues essays. Thanks for watching, and good luck preparing for your exam.